Hey everyone, welcome to Admit One with G Money. Today we have the co-founders of Virtue Animation, a Web3 animation studio producing innovative, high-quality IP for the metaverse. A former EVP at Disney and Paramount Pictures joined forces with the former corporate marketers of Anheuser-Busch and Lyrical Lemonade to create a studio dedicated to building a platform for original IP by leveraging the tools of blockchain technology. Their first creative endeavor is Basemint Gang, an irreverent satirical cartoon focused on NFT rejects finding their path to becoming authentic degens. Please welcome Bob Bacon and Josh Wagner. How are you guys? Thanks for taking the time.
Hey, good morning.
GM.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm currently in LA this week. Wags and I were talking about this a little bit before, but like I don't know. I always find it interesting when I'm in the East Coast and I like will message somebody on my team or somebody that I'm working with based out of LA, and then they respond at like 8 a.m. New York time, which is 5 a.m. LA time. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing up at this hour? And I'm doing the same thing myself. Like, I think I've been up every day at like 4 a.m. because like that's 7 a.m. New York, right? And it's like, I'm like, oh, I have work to do. So it's just really interesting, like to kind of be in that dynamic right now. I assume, is this what, are you guys early risers generally? Because like I guess you're doing probably so much business with like people that are ahead of you in time schedule.
To be honest, we schedule most of our morning things, like pre-scheduled tweets and stuff. But
Uh-huh.
for me to get creative, it's like in the wee hours of the night, so like 2 a.m.,
Okay.
3 a.m. So I'm a late
Yeah, yeah.
riser.
All right, cool, fair enough.
Wag
Yeah, no,
never sleeps,
it's
actually.
funny. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I said, I think Wags never sleeps, actually, from what I could tell.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's another thing.
Yeah, no, I get a lot of the same commentary myself where people are like, "Do you ever sleep?" It's because like I'm never like maybe offline more than like 5 or 6 hours at a time, because like that's kind of like I luckily don't sleep that much, but yeah, it's just really interesting. It's an interesting dynamic that I've experienced in LA. I don't know if I could ever live in LA, to be perfectly honest. I'm just like too much of a New Yorker to make that West Coast transition. But I get it. Like I understand why people live here. Like the weather's great, the people are beautiful, and there's always something to do outside, right?
It's time for me to move, I think, then.
But yeah, no, but thanks for taking the time. Wags, I also want to give a shout out. I noticed the orange beanie, so we're looking like twins here. So
Let's go.
mad props for that.
My
But yeah,
beanie
I
gang.
yeah,
My
yeah.
ape's got a beanie, so I had to. And I
All right,
actually got that
perfect.
because of G Money. So.
Oh, nice. I love it. I Nothing makes me happier than when there's like other collections that come out that have an orange beanie on it and people are like, "Oh, that's the G Money beanie." And I'm like, you want to talk about branding? Like that's good, right? Like I'm
Boom.
like
Yeah.
so happy about that. I'm also, I mean, the Adidas beanies I think are shipping pretty soon, so like I'm really excited to see the beanies out in the wild. I've seen a couple of the hoodies out in the wild, but like I'm really excited for the beanies and more of that merch to get out there. Because I do think that like that's kind of like what I've been focusing on, and I'm super excited about with coming up with Miami is creating that and fostering that connection IRL, right? Of And I know you guys are doing something in Miami, and we'll get into that in a second because I'd love to talk about it. But I guess like what I'd like to start with is how did you guys end up coming together to found Virtue Animation, right? Like where does that start? Like what's the origin story of that?
Yeah, well, actually, it's kind of an interesting story. As you probably know, I spent a lot of time in the traditional Hollywood world out here in the West Coast and working for some pretty great places. And lastly, I was actually working for the great Kobe Bryant before his death. Probably a lot of people don't know Kobe as anything but a basketball player, but he was a super creative guy as well, and actually won an Oscar for Dear Basketball a few years back, which was a short about a sort of a love letter to basketball after he retired. He fell in love with animation through that process, and then had the dream of starting an animation studio So I got a call from Kobe, which was a thrill for me because I'm actually a big basketball guy and an LA native. And he asked me to head up his animation studio at Granity Studios. And so we were drawing up plans for that when tragedy struck, as we all know. But in the weirdest of ways, you know how the world works. It was a time like literally a few weeks after that I met Wags, and we shared this love for sports and animation, and were inspired by Kobe and his life and what he wanted to do, and carried that inspiration into Virtue and formed it as a company with a few other founders. In some ways, to fulfill his mission, you know, with the idea of collaborating through animation with other creators and bringing them into our world.
Yeah, I mean I think that's really cool. I guess I'd like to dig in on that a little bit, Bob, is like coming from, you know, the traditional world of Hollywood, what is it that really enticed you about Web3? You know, and I know we've had a couple of these conversations offline, so like I'm super, you know, I'd love for you to share that, you know, with the audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I spent actually about 3 decades in the traditional world of Hollywood, and you know, the interesting thing there is that it's an amazing business with incredible people and, you know, real talent and the resources to get it done. But the barriers to entry are super high, and it's very, very difficult to break into the business. It's very difficult from an economic standpoint to sustain anything in the business, and there's just really honestly, you know, there's really about like 6 major studios that do all the work, and that means there's about 6 chairs that are making the decisions about what gets made and what doesn't get made. And because of the risk averse nature due to the economics of the business, it's really difficult to get into it. So in my career, I've sat on both sides of the table. I've been a buyer in Hollywood, you know, making those decisions, and I've been a seller too, trying to get my projects made. It's really hard. The studio model, like I said, is expensive. It's slow, and like I said, it's controlled by a few of these suits. So I think when blockchain came along, to me, I've spent my career really at this intersection of content and technology, which I really love because I think in the best ways they mutually inform each other. Sometimes technology really forces creative people, you know, and shows them new ways. And sometimes creative people are asking for things that tech can't support yet and pushes the technology. So when blockchain came along, it felt like, you know, to me, I got really excited because I could see a lot of different possibilities of how we might trailblaze and use this new tech. There's new forms of distribution. There's new ways to create financing. There's new ways to reward the creators more directly, and also to have those creators work more directly with their community, and bring them into the process, which is really different than the closed doors of Hollywood. So from those sort of main concepts, you know, we had the crazy idea to kind of change the world, if you will, and build a new studio with this new use case. So, you know, I think fundamentally we just like creating, we like having fun, we like hanging around like really cool people and doing cool stuff. So that doesn't change, but the way that we might be able to go about it, I think blockchain Web3 really suggested something different. So that was exciting for me.
Cool. And I want to thank you for sharing that. And I want to unpack that in a second. But before we get into that, Wags, I want to go into a little bit about your background and, you know, how you ended up here. I know you've been in the space for a minute, just like, so for those people that aren't aware of your history of like, you know, how'd you end up here? Right. Like, and like what has been your experience in the space so far?
Good question. Thanks for having me, G. Love you, man. Yeah, when I was raised in like a trailer park in Missouri, so I was always like, I knew how to make it out, so I was always trying to learn. I was starting businesses by like 8 years old. Started a company, a hustle when I was 10, where I was like taking water bottles and I was putting Kool-Aid in them, and I flipped the labels, wrote Super Juice on it, and I was selling them on the playground. And we actually put Super Juice into the Basemint Gang series. That's just like a little Easter egg. But rose up pretty quick through the corporate ladder. I was an executive at 26 running a $12 billion business, building brands. And then got really fascinated by crypto in 2017. I had a buddy send me a white paper on peer-to-peer media distribution. And I was like, holy cow, this is going to change the entire entertainment industry. So went down the rabbit hole, started investing, did pretty well. Actually started building a company on Ethereum, leveraging a smart contract in 2017. And then the crash happened in January, late January. And I think I lost a good amount of money in a company in like 60 days. So the last crash, I think, was actually way worse than it is now. And so after that, I had left corporate and started working with different startups and entertainment, tech, and that's linked up with Cole Bennett and Lyrical along the way. And I've done different things with them. We launched a Web3 project like a year ago. So been able to like see different businesses, work with different types of creators, and got deep into this NFT world like October 2020. And me and Bob started to degen into Top Shot, and that was like our first endeavor. And Bob still plays Top Shot every day to this day, so he's like a Top Shot whale.
Oh,
But
nice.
it was
Perfect.
yeah, it was a great learning experience. Running different businesses, and then I've always just had a passion for animation and storytelling. So kind of got to flex a different part of my brain, and we started to carve this out and say, hey, I think this is a new model for creators and for the film world. And rather than talk about it, let's go put some stuff out in the market and see what works and what doesn't. And I think that's the best way to learn.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, no, that makes total sense. You said something a few minutes ago that I thought was really interesting, and I think it's kind of timely. So I'm gonna ask to unpack that. Why do you think the last cycle, the last crash, was worse than this one? And the reason why I'm asking is because this is a lot of people's first cycle, and there is a lot of despair out there. So I'd love if you could delve into that a little bit.
I mean, in the last cycle, right, I think after that February crash, there was less than 5,000 traders maybe in the world. There was no big companies getting in. And at that point, it was very much like, oh, we knew crypto was a scam and this whole thing is just fake. And it was ultra bearish, right? Pretty much everything died for like, I feel like at least a year and a half, 2 years. That's why I'm like so respect people like yourself who doubled down on their conviction. Some other buddies that did the same, and they were rewarded for it, right? And the same thing as the companies that became like they started building in 2018. OpenSea being one of those, right? They probably had to eat shit for a couple of years while they bootstrapped, and then they were hugely rewarded and became the unicorns that rose out of the ashes. So it was worse because there wasn't all these big signals of like big companies getting involved. And now we've got Amazon and Apple and PlayStation and all these big companies that you can tell are now committing time, money, resources to make their eventual transition. And now we really do know, blockchain is going to change every industry as we know it. And the big opportunity is not the bubble that we exist in today. It's when the masses come in. And I always say there's 3.3 billion gamers, right? There's 30 billion, I think, 30 million, something that play Fortnite every day. So the next cycle is going to be driven through content and through gaming. And that's where I see the really big opportunity for growth.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? And especially, looking at, let's say, the price of Ethereum right now, we're at 1,100, right? And that's kind of where we topped off in 2018. And to your point is like, how many more users are there, right? We have significantly more users in the ecosystem than we did in 2017, 2018. And a lot of times, like, it's easy, and I'm saying this to like all the people that are listening out there, because I think when you get like, sometimes you get caught up in the micro transactions and the micro cycles that's happening, where this FTX collapse happens and people are like, this is going to set crypto back, 5-10 years. It's like, well, like the same week or the week after, Nike announces Nike.swoosh, right? Like you have all these companies that do have an active NFT strategy, that they plan on going down, regardless of, market conditions, right? Regardless of where we are, even in the macro cycle, you know?
Right. I mean, think about this. I actually just wrote a thread, and I was doing my research about when the internet was emerging, right? And you had the late '90s. You had people get really excited. You had a bunch of companies rush in. Not enough users at the time in the 2000 bubble. There was 400 million users of the internet. That's way more than we have in crypto. You had a bunch of companies rush in. The tech wasn't fully there yet. They got huge valuations based on a pitch deck, and it drove way over hyperinflated market that led to that crash. And it was actually November of 2000 when everything fully bottomed, basically went to zero, huge tech layoffs. There was very few companies that survived. So there's a lot of parallels that draw to that dot-com bubble. And there's the famous article, I think, that the New York Times wrote that said the internet's a fad. And we're in that. It's so crazy. I always say that nothing new happens. The technology just changes. The same cycle's happening right now. And I think that in 20 years, we'll look back and laugh that this was even who would have ever questioned the internet, right? And then the companies and the people that doubled down in 2000 and said, screw it, we're going to keep building, you would have done really, really well. So that's kind of all the conviction that I need. And also the conviction of meeting some of the smartest, most talented, most ambitious people in the world. They're all here building in Web3. And I always think people are the ones that lead the future.
Right. Yeah. And, like I said, it's funny because even sometimes I get disheartened, right? Sometimes when it's like, oh my God, like the macro is going to take longer. What does this mean for adoption? What does this mean for the things that I'm working on, right? Because also it's like you want to have that community, right? And I think you guys have done a great job, right? Like you're a member of Admit One, and I know Admit One is part of a member of the Basement Gang and the Virtue Studios community, right? Some members are in there, and a lot of it comes down to being able to foster that community and understanding that things cycle up and things cycle down, right? Like that's just like the nature of price action, because it's funny because I've even experienced it, people messaging me privately saying me, hey, because of the things that happen on the macro level, I have to sell my A1. It's not because I don't have support for you. It's just I need access to liquidity or whatever have you. And I'm like, great. When you're ready to come back, I'm, hopefully, when that time comes, hopefully you can come back in, I'll be ready to have you. But a lot of times, as a founder, you're sitting there and you're like, okay, how do we build that excitement for the things that we're working on, right? And I think you guys have done a good job of that out of the gate. I would love to kind of, I guess, chat about that. So I guess first off, you guys had a mint a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago at this point. Can you go over what that was, and what are the benefits or being part of the community, and how the reception has been since?
Yeah. So we actually, after when we started in October 2020, the studio, we started working on a project with Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, some NBA guys. So that was our first foray, was actually doing art, story, animation for them. So it was a good learning experience. And then we did another one in the summer, which involved story, games, whole thing that they ended up spinning off and going somewhere else with. But it's now this was, those were services based. So we took all the money and the learnings and experience that we had to build out this model for Film 3 with Basement Gang. So Basement Gang is the one we just launched, and effectively we're fusing storytelling with gamification. And I think that's something that's going to be really impactful and a big part of the future of entertainment is we need story because it gives us this emotional connection. Everybody watches content, right? Netflix, storytelling, YouTube. But what we're trying to do and the model we've built is making this gamified experience. So as you go through the journey, you're earning different rewards and you're able to actively participate and engage along this adventure. So we've had a lot of fun building that. And we also built a custom music soundtrack. So I worked with 16 Web3 music artists, some really awesome names: Daniel Allen, Rio Cragen, Wax Motif, Pussy Riot. So we created this cool soundtrack that we've also fused into this whole experience. And yeah, pretty good start so far and great community. Like they're just diehard passions. And our slogan is Vibes Are the Grail. And we came up with that because I think that Vibes Are the Grail basically means number up, number down. If you have vibes and if you have a community that's there for the people, for the energy, for the mission, then you have something that's really special and sustainable over the long term, right? The projects that get super hyped based on price don't have a lot of sustainability, in my opinion, because once the price goes down, there's no vibes left. So I think that's people have to think more in terms of how do I build a brand and a community that can have more substance than just price.
That's really interesting because that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about is like you need to build like that foundational layer that's not based on price action, right? It's like how do you get people to be excited about the project and the things that you're working on the same way that like I love Mickey Mouse, right? Like I never had a financial interest in Mickey Mouse, like, but I'm like, yeah, like Mickey's here, Mickey's there, right? It's just like it's that meme and loving that meme, and it comes from building that community and that storytelling and all those things, right? Yeah, I think it's really interesting because especially like during a bear market, and I want to commend you for being able to launch successfully and build a community in a bear market, and do well because like there have been plenty of projects where they maybe underestimated demand or overestimated demand and weren't able to do the things that they wanted to do because they wanted to build on hype and this and that. And again, it comes from that place of, hey, we need to have that foundational layer. And I think when I look in crypto, I look at a project like Art Blocks, right? Where 2 years ago their projects like took forever to mint out, right? Like Chromie Squiggles took like 6 weeks before it minted out, and now it's considered a grail in the space. So the market conditions were definitely different, but it's just something to consider, right? That I think a lot of project founders don't think about, right? You said something interesting there in your response about gamification. I guess like what are some I think this is like, to me, this is like kind of like the coolest part, right? And this is what, like, when I envision 90cc long term, these are the things that excite me is like, how do you get your token holders who have a vested interest in the success of the project to now have some sort of say? I'm not saying like full like executive producer say, right? But like some sort of say in the decision making process. And I think we've seen this here and there with like different projects. I think Jenkins the Valet, right, bringing on Neil Strauss to write a book where people that were part of the community get access to some of the things, get access to maybe the writer's room, and like maybe like, and I'm going to simplify this where it's like, do you go right or left, right? And like kind of like the community chooses which decision gets made, but ultimately like the story is kind of intact. What are your guys' thoughts around that? And like, and I'm sure you guys have thought about it a lot. Like one of the things that I'm super, super interested in is like, how can you use this new technology and do like really cool, outlandish shit that maybe even the technology can't do just yet, right? That like eventually in the future you're going to do. What are your thoughts around that? Are there some things that I'm sure you guys have crazy brainstorming sessions where you're like, that would be really dope if we could do that, but like we're just not there yet. Like if you could share some of those ideas, I think that would be awesome.
You're definitely touching on the things that we think about. First of all, you're building with your community, so you're involving them directly in the process, and it's an immediate feedback loop, which is really different. My experience is that you take years to develop, and then you take about 3 to 4 years to produce, and at the very end, you're doing like test audiences, getting their feedback and their notes, and you're finally getting some feedback, on your project. You've spent literally tens of millions of dollars, if not $100 million at that point on a feature film before you're out if your audience even likes it. Here we get to do that right away. We get their feedback, and we think that, like I was saying earlier, unlike shutting out the audience, we invite them into our process. So if we can bring them into the writer's room and help them with their ideas, I think that that's great. I see it almost like we used to talk about like American Idol or something like that, where you do have the judges and they're experienced producers in the music business, but the audience is playing a role as to who they want to see and who they really react to. And so there's kind of like a funneling that happens where it's pretty wide in the beginning, then you get down to the right ideas. We like the idea of bringing our audience as perhaps even characters or even the talent, people like yourself, into the project directly. And that's something really different too. So I've always dreamed of this is, to have the audience member actually be in the picture. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, there's some ideas of like if you go sat in the movie theater, you can have a camera on a certain seat, and that person gets basically like clipped onto a green screen and they appear in the movie, and you walk out with a version of the movie with yourself in it. I would personally love that. So whether
I want to stop you right there because there was something that you said earlier, and but then I want to go down that rabbit hole a little more because I think that's super interesting what you just said. But one is I don't like one of the things that people always lament about to what you were saying is like that focus group and the feedback group, right? Like I mean we've all heard that story. I'm sure you've lived it where the movie gets made, it's a 50, 100 million, like a huge budget, and then all of a sudden you test it and like the audience hates it, and now the studio's like, well, we're fucked, right? Like it's like we need to adjust. And I've experienced this from, let's say, the financial perspective, where a lot of these companies are publicly traded, right? Like your Lionsgates, I think Lionsgate's bought by somebody else now, but Disney, Fox, and sometimes what some of these big movies, right? Like that would make the quarter, right? It's like if you have like a Marvel movie coming out, like the quarter's made or break, it's make made or broken on on the release of that project. And like if initial screenings, and I know this because I've traded stock off of Rotten Tomatoes results as they start coming in on the website, right? Where it's like the Rotten Tomato score is incredibly bad, and it's like, oh shit, they're not going to hit their numbers. And like it's crazy because I'm seeing it from that perspective. And so obviously these focus groups are super, super important. And the fact that they happen so late in the process is a bug. It's not a feature, right? And so it's like when you look at crypto, and it's one of the things that like I always tell people, I'm like, listen, like you have the peanut gallery and you have your people that if they don't like something, they will be very vocal very early on about what they do and they don't like, right? And so a lot of times people are like, oh, that's a bug, but it's like, why don't you think of it like a feature, right? Is like instead be like, hey, all right, this is really good critical feedback. If our community doesn't like this, then maybe we should take it into account. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna go and pander to the community every time that they complain about something, but it's something to like consider at least, right? And I think that is one of the beautiful things about the space, right? But I guess along those lines, right, as a creator, part of it is you want to surprise and delight, right? And so then how much do you share from the storytelling with the community? Because part of it is like you want to awe them, like when it comes out, when the final product comes out, not where it's like, oh yeah, well, we knew what the storyline was, like, we knew the entire process along the way. Do you plan on being fully transparent with everything, or do you plan on doing tidbits here and there?
I mean, it's such a great thing that you were saying, and in fact, the surprise and delight is what I love to use. It's a double-edged sword, actually, G Money, because at least in the film traditional business, things are really rough early on. Especially in animation, you're literally talking about like little pencil drawings that some people can't even read, and the process that something goes through. It's like, look, the closest thing I can tell, like the layman, is it's like a house renovation. If you walk in, in the beginning when it's demoed, it looks like crap and everything's a mess everywhere, and then you walk in at the end and it's beautiful and staged, and you're like, oh my god. That's how movie making is too. So sometimes when you show it to the audience initially, they can't see past that initial mess. They can't see the ultimate vision, and they criticize it really early, and that could be a death to the project early on. So a lot of creators, they're fearful of that. I mean, I worked on a movie called The Little Prince, and I convinced the director at the time to go screen it to a bunch of school children when it was in the pencil test stage, and it actually went really well because the kids actually have the ability to visualize something beyond what it is, and the adults are tend to take it like straight ahead. But you're right; it could be a bug or it could be a feature depending on how you use it. I think that you have to not be afraid. You have to have enough confidence in your own ideas and to know where it's going to go. But you have to be able to communicate those as well, because if you are making a mistake, I think like with most mistakes, I say fail fast and fail cheap. And you'd rather do that early where the fall is not so great. And this is why Hollywood's difficult, because waiting too late in the game means that the costs and the failures are really expensive, and people lose their jobs and the earnings go down, like you said. And it's a serious business. So therefore, people are super risk averse as to kinds of things that they want to look at, the types of people that they want to work with. And that's why you feel like Hollywood is very much a copycat town, because they only do something once the model is proven, and that's kind of a shame, for creators.
Yeah, that's just to build on that. Sorry, just to build on what Bob said. Like, I think any good um, business is started with what problem are we solving for, and I think that's how we looked at and approached this. With film three, is like, what are the problems, and how can we potentially solve for those? And that's a huge problem. Is that there's a risk aversion, which means they can make Spider-Man 19 because they know it's going to hit certain metrics, and that's a safer bet for them. So we then lack maybe creativity. There's a lot of, I think, lack of creators getting an opportunity from different backgrounds, races, whatever. So then, you have like a certain group that's making the same movies over and over. And I think, that leads to huge problems. And then obviously the economic side of film is super broken and old as well. So I think that's what we're looking to change is, can we do new original IP that's different, that nobody's ever seen, and then collaborate with people from all different backgrounds and worlds. And that's what's been fun about Basement Gang is we have 32 contributors on this project, from music artists to artists, animators, tech people. So bringing like super talented people from all these different worlds and backgrounds, races, genders, and putting all those ideas together. And that's the team, as well as with the community. We say that our community is not our customers, or they're not our community, really. They're actually our partners. They're our team. And I've said that since day one of us kind of doing spaces and Twitter. And that mindset of like, you're actually a partner on our team has really allowed us to get awesome feedback and a lot of community participation to help us build this property.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take this moment to shamelessly pat myself on the back, because we recorded like my piece of the episode. I think it was earlier this week or last week, and Lisa, my producer, hit me up afterwards, and she's like, "That was really fast. Like, have you done that before?" I'm like, "What?" And she was like you literally like went through your lines like really quick. I'm like, I how does it usually go? Like like how many takes does somebody need to do to go through the lines? She's like, no, that was like really fast and efficient. So I was like proud of that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I had other shit to do. Like I want like I don't have like 3 hours to record these lines. So it's been fun from, let's say, like a partner and a collaborator perspective of kind of coming in. We went through the lines, and then I read my lines, and we were recording them, and hopefully like the final product comes out great, right?
Absolutely. You were a pro. We were really impressed. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was good. We're excited. Like we've tied together. This will be the second time like content story actually tied to real life experience. So it'll be cool because we're tying Basel into this episode, and you're activating there with Medved and Gateway. So tying all these cool things together, and Basel will be the premiere.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be great. What let's actually, before we get into that, I want to touch on, Bob, what you were saying a little bit earlier about being able to go into a show, into a movie, and kind of be that main character of that movie. That kind of had me thinking about AI, the advancements that we've seen in AI, especially initially, I think, just on like the still image side, but I assume on like, let's say full motion picture side, or, full like videos or what have you, there has to be a lot of exciting stuff there that I'm sure like piques your interest, right? Of things that you're thinking about there, what have you found really interesting? Because I do think like this whole, to the points that you guys were just saying, that you've been saying, is like the democratization of access to this technology will lead to a humongous increase in creativity, right? Because who knows, like maybe the most creative person in the world is like somewhere in Africa, and up until now they haven't had the tools to tell that story. That could be maybe the story of our generation, right? And like at the end of the day, it's like now by getting access to those tools, that story might be able to come to light, and that person doesn't necessarily need to be somebody that's, oh, I know the right person in the right cities. And yeah, I'm just super curious as to your thoughts on AI.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I think just as you're speaking to the ability to put in certain prompts, and have the technology take you a very long way to create something, whether it's scripts or visual images, is super fascinating. I think still you want to have it in the hands of people who know what to do with it. I do like to say that the pencil and paper have been around a long time, but it doesn't make everybody a great novelist, right? So having access to the tools is one thing, but talent still plays a role. What you're saying is that rather, again, the idea of it being a hindrance or a help is that if the tools are democratized and they're out there and they're more accessible from a cost standpoint, then you can put them in the hands of a lot of different people, and you can discover that talent. So instead of the talent being sort of hidden under a rock that we never turn over, we might actually discover a lot of rocks out there. And what's also cool to me is there's been a certain kind of creator, I would say, that's pretty standard over the years, and there's so many stories to tell from around the world. That's something from a cultural perspective, from their own particular history, that I get excited about, is not to hear the same sort of stories that we've heard time and time again, but to hear them from different places. I mean, I think just a few years ago, even, it doesn't seem that long, but a superhero movie like Wakanda or something like that would not have been told. I worked on I tried to buy a movie years ago called The Book of Life from a great animator, and it's based in sort of Mexican heritage, and the studio didn't want to buy it because they thought the audience would be limited. So we need to hear more stories. We need to put the tools in the hands of creators who can come up with these great things. And it takes you a certain way. I think it's funny. My history is starting with Walt Disney, and Walt, like a lot of people don't know, probably won more Academy Awards in technical achievement than anybody in history. He was always playing around with new technology, and people are generally afraid of it in the beginning, and then they adopt to it. So, in the very early days, even going back to Snow White, they did a thing called rotoscoping, which they took an actor in the studio and they basically traced over the film of that person, and they got lifelike animation. And then, many, many decades later, I was pioneering a technology where everybody's using it today, like in deep fakes, where you can digitally create a human being. And the animators really freaked out, actually. So they thought we were up to something no good, and that we were ready to replace them as animators. And you had to remind people that no, it's actually like an old technique, just with new technology. We did the same thing decades ago on Snow White. Don't be afraid of it. It only takes you so far. But if you put those tools in the hands of great creators, they'll figure out what to do with it. And like the sky is the limit, totally. I think it's going to be fun.
I think we're like, I've said it, like we're on this verge of this degenerescence, a renaissance moment where like art and technology fuses together, and like some of the greatest creations come out of that. And why is three things. One, we have social media, which is now a marketing tool that allows you to build brand for free, right? That didn't exist 20 years ago. You needed TV, you needed print, that cost money. Two, now we have Web3 and NFTs as like a tool for a way to build community, have some sort of revenue streams, like as you're seeding for that project. And then three, with AI and that evolution with Dale, now there you have the ability to, and other emerging tech, like reduce the costs. Because animation, a lot of people don't know, can be like $1 million a minute. It costs sometimes like $200 million to make a Pixar movie or more. So now with these technologies, you'll have more people actually have the ability to make animation, to write scripts in their bedroom, right? And like that will, when the costs decrease, more people get opportunity. Coupling that with social and Web3, those three pillars are going to fuel this whole creative renaissance, I think, for the next decade.
Right. And to take that point even further, right, especially what you said, Bob, about, what we have is just new tools for people to express their creativity. Like the interesting thing is like, especially, over the last year with the rise of AI, right? It's like, okay, like now I'm a data prompt, everybody's a data prompt engineer, right? So I'll be like, hey, Midjourney, like imagine, and I like put in my scene. And what I'm realizing is like, my first thing would be like, guy wearing a shirt, and like it's very like unspecific, right? And it's like you have to get more in depth, like in a photorealistic version, film noir, guy sitting in a chair, lonely in the corner, and you have to be like very, very descriptive, which is interesting because I think like over the next whatever 5 to 10 years, we're gonna see like a rise in courses of like how to be an AI data prompt engineer and how to get the outputs, right? That people that you want, and use that. And I only know this because I've been using it personally for like a mood board, right? Where I'm like, okay, this is an idea that I want to go with. And so what you were just saying, Wags, is like I could write the storyboard and I could write the script and I could have a rough outline that maybe gets generated off of it. But then it's like you want to have like an expert's eye on being like, okay, well, what if we tweak this like that, and we adjust the camera angle there, and we get this kind of side shot, and because that creates more emotion in it, that it's like maybe the AI like really like lowers the cost of production for proof of concept, but then you still need to go in there and kind of like put the fine tuning into it, right?
I think that's totally right. I mean, like when we transitioned from traditional animation, hand-drawn animation to CG, it was a whole new tool set for a lot of animators. And simple things like, it was funny, just the tech at the time, like if you bent your elbow, it was like bending like a straw bends. So you had this like crease, and people who weren't like familiar with good art, they accepted that crease, and then you had the traditional animators go, no, 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 it's lacking volume now. Like it looks like a bent straw. It looks cheap. It looks bad, and it's going to detract from the story that you're trying to tell. And then they sort of refined those because the good eye saw what was missing and what needed to be added. So again, I think you're totally right. I think it brings up like sort of the floor for a lot of people, or brings down the floor, whatever that is. But you still have to like hit the ceiling, with good eyes, good art, and taking it to that highest level. It's exciting. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, right, is like when you take a look at like the difference between great and excellent is like 1%, right? Like the best player in the world in any sport is maybe like 1% better than the second best player. Mm-hmm. But that 1% is where all the difference lies, right? That's where like the big money is. I'm butchering the quote, but Tony Robbins says like pretty much that exact concept, right? Where it's like the difference is so minuscule, but that's where all the value is, where you're like, oh, well, I'm 99% of the way there. But that 1% is really where like all that extra value lies, yeah, right? And I think this proves that.
There's a great book, I think, called Good is the Enemy of Great. It speaks to that sort of idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I guess I know we have a few moments left. I want to talk a little bit about what are you guys doing at Art Basel? So we're coming out with this later this week on Thursday, I believe. And when are you releasing the clip, of the Basemint Gang teaser clip, as well as what do you guys have planned for Art Basel, so that if people I know we have a good amount of I'm telling you this from my personal experience, is a lot of people are starting to FOMO into Art Basel over the last 2 or 3 days, where people have been reaching out to me. So I know you guys have something planned. So for people that want to know and want to experience the pop up that you guys are doing, what's the best way to get there?
Totally. Basel's my favorite week of the year. I think that's where we met last year. And then
Yep.
we hopped the jet to Puerto Rico. That was fun.
Yeah.
Short
Yeah.
lived, but yeah, Puerto Rico was awesome too.
The
Yeah, so
top. That was literally the top.
that was the top. We were riding high, and it's just kind of been
Yeah.
downhill since there. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm ultra bullish on everything happening. Basel is going to be awesome. There's so many cool people going. We're going to premiere and drop the episode with yourself, G Money, and Medved. We're going to do that December 1st. So that's Thursday. We're going to premiere it at the Gateway and on that Thursday, probably evening. So details to come there. And then we'll also premiere it and feature it at an event. It's a festival that we're doing with Trippy. So we're activating there, Trippy Labs, and it will be a 3-day festival, some amazing, talented music artists and DJs, a really cool art gallery with some top artists, and just a really cool kind of music festival style party. And then we're actually going to do this treasure hunt there. So you'll actually go around the festival grounds, and if you collect all 10 QR codes, then you'll earn a 101 custom basement bud. So a fun activation, and then our community actually will get tickets to there. If you own a Virtue Pass, or if you own 5 basement buds, you get a free VIP ticket to the festival. So we're excited.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's really cool. I know Trippy's event last year was really dope. He had like a really, really great lineup of DJs, and I think I'm probably gonna head out there at some point. So I'm definitely gonna see you guys there. I'm looking forward to it. Amazing. How many episodes do you plan on making for season 1?
It's a good question. This will be our 10th episode. We actually ended up dropping 9 before the Mint, as well as the full music soundtrack. So we built a lot of product before Mint because we wanted to kind of prove that, we had something more than just on talk. So executing and delivering on what we said was important. So we'll see how many episodes for season 1. And at someday I'd love to do a season 2 where we scale. This is very much like a Web3 South Park vibes. But at some point, maybe season 2, we scale up and out so we can reach more of the masses, because that's where I see the big opportunity is reaching, globally through content and gaming.
And how fast? I think it's funny you mentioned South Park, because I was just about to ask this question. I think one of the amazing things that I love about South Park, I don't know if they do it anymore, but there was a stretch of a few seasons there where they would literally write and produce and make each episode each week. So like they would have literally the most current news of the news cycle from like literally like 7 days ago as they were doing it. And I think the fact that I think they're comedic geniuses in their own right, even before that. But the fact that they were able to put out good content that quickly amazed me. I'm curious, how fast, like what's your turnaround time usually on episodes?
It's a good question. I mean, before Mint, we did in 5 weeks, we did those like 9 shorts, which ended up being about 30 minutes. And what was cool about that is I was actually able to take like memes and jokes that were happening in this space, because seemingly every week there's a new drama or meme. So like an example is we tied like the Vitalik, boner picture, and we said like, oh, like Chad was like, oh, I longed into the schlong. So you take like little bits and memes like that and tie it in. So I think our goal would be right now, maybe around 2 to 3 weeks, we can turn a 5-minute episode, but I think our goal would be to keep like getting that to a faster speed. And, because one of the biggest problems in the space is customer retention. So you need to continually have always on engagement to keep people engaged, give them something to either watch or do. And like I said, I think there's always like a new drama or rug of the week. So, being able to turn things like that keeps people captivated. And with a model like South Park, it's always interesting because it's relevant and it keeps it fresh, right? There, you don't ever get lost in a lull of a series because you're just drawing on things like that and making fun of it. So yeah, I think we're having fun with it, and we'll see where it goes.
All right, awesome. Well, guys, thanks for taking the time to come on. For people that want to keep up with everything that you guys are doing, what's the best way to keep up with your project and stay up to date?
At Basemint Gang, Basement is MINT with an I, and basementgang.com is the website. And we've got the episodes are on the site. We have a puzzle game you can play. The music soundtrack is there, and you can actually train your buds. Our NFTs are evolving. So a lot of cool things we have that will roll out over this adventure, and we'd love to have people. And I know you and the Admit One crew are community members, so we appreciate that, man, and I'm excited to drop this episode.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Everybody, thanks for tuning in, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see you guys in Miami and catch up and see everything that you guys are working on.
Thanks, you.
But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Appreciate the conversation.
Likewise. Thank you, and thanks everybody for tuning in.